is still live here. Looks like my backdrop is fallen. So these were just some pears from my tree, and then I think I've had this apple for like a month, and it's still good. I don't know how that's possible. I've been scared to eat it though. But so I just set up some fruit here with a little pillowcase as my drapery, and I was going to use that to do a little study for. I do have just one light shining over on it, but this camera is really sensitive to light, so it may look more lit than that. And I just put like a canvas and closed my mini blinds to kind of block out some of the outside light. Now, to draw with, I have two types of paper here. Of course, you can use just your regular drawing paper. That's totally fine. But they do make paper for pastels and then color paper as well. So I have this one. This is a kind of off white, and then there's a few different colors of like, it's not really brightly colored, but you can see like a tint of blue, green, a brown, and then this kind of off-white. And then this is a pastel paper. This one is also, it's like mostly earth tones that, and it's really textured. And this brand, I really like this Canson Mi Tienes in pastel paper because it's got a side, I don't know if you all can see this or not, but one side is usually smoother, and then the other side, oh yeah, this side's really smooth, and this side's got a really coarse texture. So some students like to, see the texture, and some people like their work to be a lot smoother. So you get to make the decision which side you want to work on. But not all papers are like that. Another thing, I don't know if you've noticed this, but this brand Canson, when you open up their pads, they always list like all of their paper and then all the different media that you can use. And so you can find like a paper, if you like to do a bunch of different things, you can find paper that will really work for everything. And so if you notice, like the mixed media paper kind of has a lot of check marks everywhere, as well as like the watercolor paper. So I tend to buy more of that if I'm not really sure, what the piece is going to end up being. So I'm just going to tear out a piece of, I really like to use gray paper to do fruit studies on. I don't know why. So I'm going to tear off a piece of that for that, and then I think I'll take this lighter color paper for the Frida demo. Let me set up my camera so. Sorry, the clip on my camera broke, so it's being a little weird. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good view. All right, so I have here a few different color media that you can use. These are soft pastels, which are basically, they have the same consistency as the charcoal that we've been using. So I usually recommend those for students to use the same thing, to use these if they've been using charcoal, because it should feel more natural. And there's also oil pastels. I don't have any oil pastels with me at home. I forgot to grab those from the school before we closed. But oil pastels they were invented by Picasso. He actually came up with the idea, and a paint company made them for him. And they have oil in them, and wax, and they can be used on canvas or they can be used on paper, but you can't erase them. Where with the chalk pastels, you can erase them with your kneaded eraser, just like you can with anything else. So I tend to use the chalk pastels. I think they're a lot faster. I used oil pastels a lot in high school, and they're really fun, but you can't erase them, and they really do start to hurt your fingers whenever you're trying to blend them. But if you have some at home and you want to try one drawing in those and the other, if you have time, you could do both, or you could do a mixture of both in your sketchbook as well. I also have, these are some Prismacolor watercolor pencils. Now those aren't going to show up on this dark paper, but if you're working on your white sketchbook, you may try something like that for some of the color studies. So there's a lot of different color drawing media you can experiment with if you want to. And then I'll show you this. I don't know why I get kind of embarrassed about this, but sometimes, being an artist, you make friends with, people that buy your work, and a lot of times people that can really afford, your bigger, nicer work have money. And so one of my patrons, I'll call them, that buys a lot of my work, gave me this gift, and it is a Louis Vuitton set of colored pencils. And I've never used them because I'm scared to. It's kind of like if I ever need, if I can't pay rent 1 month, then I know I can probably go upon these. But it's like a Louis Vuitton set of things. And I didn't even know they made art supplies, but apparently they do. So anyway, I just wanted you to see if you want to. I imagine these are what celebrities' kids learn to color with. But Michael's is just as good, I think. I kind of made some marks with one of them one day, and it felt about the same as like a regular colored pencil. It's just got a fancy name on it. Now, before I get to drawing, I did want to show you. Let me just tear off a little bit of. So I wanted you to see with these different color papers how the pastels look different. Let me grab. Okay, so I have a variety of values of paper here, and where my pad of black paper went. I'll just use this. So I wanted you to see how the pastels look different. So I'm going to grab a bright red pastel and just make a mark on each of these papers. Let me put this closer so you can see. So I'm just going to make a mark on each of these papers, and I want you to see how, do you see how bright that it looks on the black paper compared to how dark it looks on the white paper? So the colors they will sort of play tricks on you depending on what color paper. They'll all look really good. If you spend time working on your drawings, you can get it to look really nice. But starting out, you'll find that's why some people prefer darker paper to work with, because they like that contrast that they can see. So sorry, my camera is not really working. All right, so so for the master study, if you choose to do that for the assignment, like I said, I was going to try using this image of the Dos Fritas, and I have, it sounds like my neighbor is weed eating right outside of my window. But I was gonna just try to do this one side of Frito and work on that. So you can crop it, and if you want to use a grid like we did last week with the self-portrait, I could probably do a 1-inch grid over this and then do the math to enlarge it onto my 9x12 paper if I wanted to. But I would start out with your willow charcoal and do a quick gesture. Of it. So if I wanted to focus more, so the willow charcoal, I know you may be kind of scared to put that onto your paper because you may think, well, it's black, it's going to mix with everything, but it's really not going to. It doesn't have a binder to it, so it's going to be really it'll just blend in with the colors. And so with knowing how Frida worked and how she used colors, I'm not going to really worry so much about doing the under colors that I talked about. I'm just going to kind of use more of a flesh tone, lighter neutral, and put that down. And you want to work in layers whenever you're working with color. So don't be afraid to make a mess, just like with our still life we did last week in our self-portrait. You don't ever want to start with details, and don't forget your negative space either. So in the background, it's like this sunny sky, and so I'm going to just take this darker blue pastel and just come in, and you have to really use your fingers to work the pastel and build up the layers of pastel. And you don't want to put too much because the paper can only hold so much. So you want to make sure you have enough texture left over that you can add the other layers that you need to of the colors. And sometimes I'll even do the background before I do the positive shape because it's easier to draw the positive shape on top of the background than try to draw the background around the positive shape. You tend to get kind of a halo. And I apologize for the sound effects. I've lived here for 5 years now, and my neighbors have never even said hi to me. I've said hi to them, so I don't really, otherwise I'd shout out the window at them, but we're not really that close for me to do that. All right, so you can see the pepper.
We can't hear it so much. It's okay.
Is it? You can hear me okay? All right.
Yeah, I don't.
You don't hear it as bad as I do. Maybe I'm just paranoid about it. Okay, so then I can start to work on the figure, and you can see I'm working from the larger areas to the smaller areas, not so much worrying about details. And you have to remember with pastels, because they're different colors, you have to choose a different finger for each color. And if you switch colors, like if I were to start doing the yellow or lighter blue part, I would probably need to go wash my hands so that I don't contaminate those areas. And or have sometimes I've had students take like paper towels and like wrap them around their fingers and then take those off, kind of like little paper towel fingers. They also have little, they almost look like eyeshadow brushes or sponges that you can use for pastels. They sell pastels in these little pans or these little circular containers too, and people use those kind of more like painting with a brush and other tools to do that. With the pastels, I would be a little cautious of breathing the powder too much because sometimes the pigments are not super healthy. They may have a warning. So if you have asthma or other breathing problems, you may want to wear like a dust mask so that you're not breathing in the powder, and then just dust the excess off into the trash can. If that's a real problem, then I would try to get the harder pastels because they're not going to have as much dust. And they also make a pastel pencil that's like these, but it comes in a pencil form. It kind of looks like a color pencil, but instead of having the waxy material on the inside, it has the chalk pastel on the inside. So now I'm going to take my white and I'm going to start to layer that in the background. Like I said, it's always easier to do the background first because then the positive shape can be drawn over that and overlap it, and then you won't have so much of a halo effect. And you can see how these colors are mixing. So I'll probably have to do several layers to get like that really bright white of the clouds. And that's how you really get the rich texture of the pastels. And in some cases, the background, the space between the clouds, I almost see some black in it that creates depth. So I may even have to come in areas and really just get a lot darker. But that's how I would start this, would just be working from really less detail to slowly areas with detail, and then come in and add the other stuff later. And I have several examples of demos I've done in the past, but they're all up at the school. I am going up there today, so if they can get to that part of the building, I may go in and photograph some of them just so I can share them with you all. But there are quite a few in the PowerPoint as well. So I find just getting something down on the paper is always better to start with. And so even if I make mistakes, I like to just kind of get everything on here, and then that will help me work from there. But at this point, I really need to wash my hands. But you can see it's starting to come together. And then I would just keep adding layers. So I would add the warmer tones in her face. I would go back in and add the more layers of white in the clouds, and then start working on the details last. If you have that spray fixative, another thing you can do is as you get like the bigger areas done, you can kind of lightly mist it with that workable fixative, and then that will kind of set it, and then you can add more on top of it, and then that way maybe it won't smudge as much. But right now you can see I've got quite a bit of loose powder. So when that starts to happen, I would just dust it off, the excess off in the trash can, so that it's not going to mix with everything else. And with erasers, you can use your kneaded eraser, your retractable eraser, whatever you need to keep pushing it forward. And I'll probably continue to work on this too later. I just wanted to go ahead and show you with the time we have left how to move on to the fruit study as well, and show you that other technique that I was talking about with the layering the complementary colors. So for if you choose to do the master study, like I said, it's 9 by 12 or up to 18 by 24. I would zoom in and crop. What I usually do in class is I have like folders from old art history books that are no longer used, and I have all the images of like famous masterpieces throughout history in folders, and the students would select one that I pre-approved. And since you all are working online, that's why I wanted you to just kind of send me an email if you choose to do this one instead of the still life. Let me know what you're doing so that I can make sure that it's one that won't get you in trouble and that I think will work out for you with color. All right, so that's the master study
Wait,
one.
sorry, I have a question.
Yes. What was your question?
It's either or. I thought it was both.
No, for the color, you're going to be able to do either a fruit still life in color or a master study.
Okay, so that's the portfolio.
Yeah, so if you see where it says for this week, it says complete your sketchbook, and then it says color portfolio assignment. It says fruit still life or master study. And I don't, yeah, I don't know why when I printed it skipped. I think I printed it from my phone, but you'll see when you get to the assignments on eCampus, it'll say, like, it explains it there more. Normally I have students do both, so if you want to do both, you can. But I know I was like, ooh, 4 drawings in 1 week. If we were meeting face to face, I would have you all do it because I know you would be there 4.5 hours a day for 4 days in a row. But since we're not meeting face to face, I was like, oh, maybe 3 would be okay. But if you want to do, the fruit study and you want to do the master study, you can do both. Like, so you can always do both of them. And I was going to show you how to use like the watercolor pencils and stuff, but I think I'm going to wait until Thursday to show you that because it kind of goes more with the ink and some of the other liquid media that we're going to use. So I'm just going to move on to doing the fruit study. So I'm going to move my camera. Let's see if. Okay, so I can't tell if you can see. I think you can see my easel and the fruit in this view. So I'm going to just tape this. I don't need to tone this paper. I wouldn't tone the paper with color, but I am going to tape it on here just so it doesn't move around. And so I can get a nice clean edge. And honestly, I'm really more of an abstract painter, but there's something about doing these, like drawing, that I still find myself doing these assignments from time to time, just for fun. And I think you'll find that with a lot of artists, they'll work in multiple styles. But to me, whenever I do like a study of a color study like this or a master study, I don't know, there's something about it that makes me feel accomplished or like I'm improving my skills. So I mean, this is something I do, in between like bigger painting projects and things that I'm working on, or just sometimes I see my students doing it in class and I'm like, I want to do that too. It's been a while since I did that. So these practices, these are things you can do at any level over and over and over. And there are some people that I know throughout history, artists that have worked just on one thing, like they studied one object and painted it their whole life. Like at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, they actually have a painting of oranges there. Whenever they open up, if any of you go there, you'll have to ask to see it. but it was on the first floor the last time that I was there. But they have a painting of oranges wrapped in tissue paper, and it's by an American artist. The name escapes me right now, but him and his wife both spent their whole career painting just oranges. And to me, that sounds like a nightmare. Like that would be like art prison or something, having to paint the same thing every day. But they wanted to be like the best painters of oranges ever. And so literally that's all they did was paint oranges. And when you see the painting they have at the Amon Carter, it literally looks like you could reach out and grab the tissue paper that was wrapped around the fruit and like grab the oranges off the paper. And I think it was pre-photography. I can't remember the exact date on it, but it was, either way, even if it wasn't, before photography, it's pretty amazing that they were able to master it. So there is something to practicing the same thing over and over. There's an artist I follow on Instagram who works only works in still lifes, and every day she does a still life painting in watercolor or gouache is like an opaque watercolor, and it's like the most simple things, like just a lemon cut in half, or a still life of her breakfast, or a flowers from her backyard. But they're just, it's like I'm like, oh, I wish I had the time, to just wake up every morning and do a realistic still life and then go about my abstract stuff. So it's good practice to be able to do things like this, especially if you want to be an art teacher, because you do need to know how to do these things with your teacher students. All right, so what I'm going to do with the willow charcoal is I'm going to sketch out my composition. Remember when I talked about before that with your composition, try to have things going off the edge of the paper. Don't draw really small. Try to draw life size or larger when possible. So I wanted to sort of have this apple going off the page here. And I'm just going to do a quick gesture. And I think sometimes you can add a sort of sense of humor to your still lifes. I thought this one was funny because it was mostly pears, and so I thought about. Sometimes I'll come up with a title, or I even do the piece of art, but I thought it might be funny to call this "The Bad Apple and the Delusional Orange," because the apple's like not really what with the rest of the group, and then the orange is hanging out like it's a pear, and it's silly, but whatever gets you through the quarantine days, right? So so I'm just using a really quick gesture to lay out this composition. So not much detail. I don't need to, draw a lot of detail. I mean, there's not really a lot of detail anyway with fruit. You hardly ever see two pieces of fruit that are exactly the same. So don't worry so much about details. Like do the gesture, and I just noticed this one I drew completely wrong. All right, so I have my composition, and now I'm going to try that technique that's in the handouts. Let me grab. I was going to wipe my hands off a little bit. So you do want to have a damp cloth or paper towel nearby to try to clean up as you go. At the school, I usually don't have to do this part because I just dust it on the floor and it gets cleaned every day, but I keep realizing after I do these with you all, I'm like, oh, I have to clean my table now. All right, so with the complementary colors, you may want to look up a little color wheel or print that slide from the PowerPoint or have it pulled up on your devices if you don't know the color wheel if you don't have it memorized. So for this orange, the complementary of orange is blue. So I can take this darker blue, and wherever I see shadows on the orange, which I see a shadow kind of over here, and then sort of in between it and the other fruit. And then I do have some lighter blues. So like maybe where it's highlighted or middle values, I might put some of this lighter blue if I want to. And then I'm gonna move on to a pear. So the pear is kind of the local color of it is kind of a yellowish green. If you go across the color wheel, I believe it's blue violet that's kind of across from it. And so I don't have, I'm trying to think of which of these colors would work. I don't really have like a true color. I may mix these two. It's kind of like a reddish violet and a bluish violet, but somewhere in between, but purplish, in the purple range. So where I see shadows on these fruit, yeah, that looks too pastel. I'm gonna use this one. That looks too magenta. So some pastel sets may not have the full range. So you may have to work with what you have. I'm just gonna use this one. Some will have like really deep colors, and some may not. So you may have to mix a little bit. This looks like a darker, almost navy color. I'm just gonna add some of that to the purple so it creates more contrast of value. So basically just think of, I'm putting this purple, cooler purple underneath where I see shadows. Okay, so and then the apple is obviously like a really deep red. So I'm gonna take for the darker areas, I'm gonna use this darker green. Oh, I forgot to explain that stuff. Okay, so now I've got um, the fruit, I've got the kind of complementary color in the shadows. Now for my background, I have this white bowl, and then I have this kind of off-white pillowcase that I was using as my drapery. And don't forget that stuff. Those things are just as much of your composition as the fruit. Like you have to have a background. And so wherever I see shadows, I'm gonna put blue. So I see this kind of cast shadow underneath the bowl. And those are my dogs barking at the neighbor that's weed eating. Teaching in a classroom someday again is going to seem so much fun compared to all of this. I have to say, this is some pretty significant training that we're all getting during all of this virtually. And if you heard that kind of scratchy sound, sometimes your pastels, they may have like a little bit of wax or like a glue kind of coating. And so you may have to kind of rub that off to get them to really make a good mark. And then for the highlights, wherever I have highlights, I'm going to take this really bright kind of yellow orange color, and I'm going to put that where the highlights are. And you'll see why in a minute. That just will really make the highlights pop more. Okay, so once you get the complementary colors where you want them to be, then I usually take my fingers and I'll just kind of blend them in a little bit to soften them up and also to kind of get the excess color off of the drawing. And you may be thinking, this looks like a hot mess. What is he doing? But this sometimes it's got to be look like this before you start to. It looks bad in the beginning, but it'll come together. I promise. So notice I changed colors as I was working. Now you can still use like your willow charcoal in this if you want to, and even your compressed charcoal, you know, if you really want to. But I would try not to. Like, see how far you can go without using black, because I think you'll be able to get quite a lot of range of value and color without using it. So now I'm going to go on to the local color. I'm just going to wipe my hands off real fast. Okay, so now I'm going to just start putting the local colors over these undertones that I have. So for the orange, now I'm going to layer this darker orange here. And then where it's lighter, I can come in with that's a little too light. And I'm not really getting into too much details just yet, but there is this kind of yellowish green little where the stem was attached to it. And then I'm going to move on to the pears. And it's okay if you like. Some days I'll blend stuff more, and some days I'll leave it more kind of loose looking. So there's a lot of different ways people work in different styles, as you saw in the PowerPoint. So don't feel like you have to overly blend if you are working in a very gestural way and you feel like you captured the essence of the fruit or your subject matter, like, you know, it can be a little bit looser. Look, if you're into art history, look up some of Cezanne's fruit studies, as a lot of his were really loose and filled with color and not really overly blended. I like stuff like that, and I'm an abstract painter, so you think I would be a little bit more loose with my drawings, but I've got an OCD kind of side that when I'm working from observation, it's like the perfectionist in me wants to overwork things sometimes. I have a hard time just stopping. But do you see how it's starting to come together? Hopefully you can see in the monitor. And then if there's darker areas, of course, I can always come back in with a darker green. And then there's this kind of, I don't know what it is on the pears, but there's this kind of reddish brown sort of spots on them. So if I want to come and put some of this color, and you saw I had to try a few of these browns out before I saw the color that really would work, because sometimes they may look one color, but when you make a mark on the paper, it looks a little different. All right, and then I'm gonna do the apple now. And this apple is really, really dark red. And it's also really in the foreground. So I'm gonna really work on making it feel closer by making the edges really sharp and clean. And I have noticed in past sets of pastels I've got before, they don't always have like the best selection of reds. I think it has to do with the source of the pigment. And so you may have to blend a couple if you have like an orangey red and then, you know, maybe more of like a really dark red. You may have to kind of blend the two together to get like the right tone that you have if you have anything that's red in your stuff. So see, I was trying to leave it all loose, but now I'm wanting to come back in and blend more. All right, so now I'm going to, I've kind of got the base layer down for each color now of the local color. And I'm going to take the white pastel and I'm going to go over the areas where it's white now. So I have this bowl. So do you see how that creates, I don't know how well you can see in the camera, but do you see how these things pop out now? Because I have the blue and the shadows of even the white area. And I can keep layering that on top. Now, as I get to the fruit, right now, the areas between the fruit are really fuzzy. And the best way to clean that up is you kind of have to go along and blend the background as close as possible to the fruit. Okay, now I feel like my neighbor's just messing with me because their yard is so small. I don't know how it takes that long to to read it, but all right. And the same thing with the fruit. I'm just gonna go back and get them really close together and try to smudge out like any blurred edges. And then if you still don't have enough definition between them, what I'll sometimes do at this point is I'll come in with my willow charcoal, not your compressed charcoal, and the willow charcoal, and I'll use it to create some definition between the two, because it's going to blend a lot easier and it'll just mix right in with the colors. So if you find that you can't get a really clean edge, you can do that. You can add some willow charcoal, and then I usually will also come back with the chalk pastel and kind of layer over that, so I'm still putting back some of that really bright pastel on top of it. And you keep going back and forth, just pushing it and pulling. So I would probably work on this for at least another 30 minutes, if not longer. And then I would start to add the stems and really clean it up and start to add more of the texture and the highlights and everything else. So once you get to that point, that's where it can get a little time consuming, depending on the level of detail. So like in the orange, I do see like that orange texture. And so in some places, it almost looks like little specks of highlight. So I might have to do that, in some areas, where in other areas it looks darker. So I may have to come in, with a darker material and add those details. But it depends at that point really how far that you want to push it. All right. And the same thing with the apple, all of them, I see like little highlights and other colors and some little specks. Those would be the very last things that I would do. So let me bring the camera a little closer, and you can see how maybe a little bit better what I was working on. But you really have to layer the colors, and as you get closer to it, it will start to really come alive. But it's a lot different than just coloring in a coloring book. You don't want to oversaturate the paper with the color. It's all about layering and going back over and really just taking it to whatever level you want. And if you notice, did you notice how I did all the sketch, the gesture, then I did all the undertones, then I layered on the local colors, then I kind of refined all the edges, and now I'm going back and doing details. So whatever you do, you want to keep doing the same thing. So at whatever point you stop, the whole drawing is treated with the same level of intensity all over. And so you could maybe stop with it being a little bit looser, or to whatever level of refinement that you want it to have. So I still need to build up some of the white a little bit more and the background, and then just put more of the details in. But I'll probably finish that later today when I get back from